Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast, and we do return in the midst of transfer window season here. And it gives us a great opportunity during this time when we catch up with many great journalists on the Tottenham circuit, and pleased to have a view from the lane legend back amongst us here. That's what they're being called these days. He is indeed joining me on this Last Word on Spurs, as he has been so far during this past couple of weeks. I've got wonderful Sean Butler over at the Spurs Talk Show. Shawnee, how are you? Lovely to see you. Let's get that mute unmiked. How are you?
The mute unmiked. Let's get the mute unmiked. There we go.
Yeah, I'm good. Mute, I should say.
I'm good, Ricky, mate. Great to be here. Great to be back on the Last Word on Spurs. One of my favourite shows of the week, and great to meet Jack for the first time as well. So looking forward to a powerful show as always. Shout out to the chat. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, thanks again, Ricky. Looking forward to it.
Pleasure is all ours, Shawnee. Thank you so much. And also, like I say, he does need no introduction. Look, he's had a year and a half away from Last Word on Spurs. Some would call that therapy in itself. Some would call that some mighty relief. But we've somehow brought him back to talk more things Tottenham. How have I done that when given his day job is talking Tottenham? I mean, that would be enough to finish anybody off. But we've got him back for some more. Look, football reporter, journalist. At the top of the show, he said, view from the lane legend. He has also been nicknamed. I'm delighted to welcome back to Last Word on Spurs, covering Tottenham and England, the wonderful Jack Pitt-Brooke is back. Jack, how are you? And you're smiling.
Hi, mate. Yeah, I am. How can I not smile? You're being so nice to me. It's really good to be back on the show. And yeah, it's been a while, but looking forward to having some Spurs chat for the next hour or so. There's a lot to talk about since I last came on. I can't even remember who was the manager last time I came on.
Oh my God!
I can barely even guess.
I want to have a guess and say we may have been in the transition of Jose to Nuno. I might be wrong.
No, I reckon it was more like Conte, Stellini, or Mason.
Oh, that basket case, right? Okay. What can I say?
What an era!
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, Jack, never a dull day on the job, right? I mean, you must full the time supporting. Oh, I say supporting Tottenham. I know behind the scenes actively now. You obviously follow the club in such I don't know what the right word would be for the way you have covered the club, but what have you made of kind of your time covering Tottenham? Because you take us back there. I mean, remind us when you actually started covering the football club.
So the first Tottenham man, I mean, initially I wasn't just doing Tottenham all the time, which is basically what I do now, but I started doing like my first Tottenham game would have been certainly under Harry Redknapp. It would probably either 2010-11 season or more likely 2011-12 season, which was Harry's last season. So, you know, like Modric, Bale, Crouch, Lennon, those sorts of players. And you know, that's when Spurs, they didn't have the training ground they're in at the moment. It's when they had the old Spurs lodge over in Chigwell, which is very, very different. You know, it was kind of very dilapidated. It was like, you remember at school, you'd have those kind of temporary classrooms that had been up for about 40 years, and they're basically made out of cardboard. That's what the old Spurs training ground was like. And so you'd kind of, you know, it was kind of off a little country road in Chigwell, and you'd have these kind of cardboard rooms. And then all of a sudden you'd see like Jermaine Defoe or Joe Jordan or Harry Redknapp walking around. So yeah, very different from now, which is like, you know, very, very plush, state of the art modern facility. It feels a bit like like a fancy golf hotel. But the old training ground was very different.
You know, I mean, I've been very lucky enough to be in the auditorium. It's a lovely venue they've got there, Tottenham in general. I mean, you kind of told us there a lot in terms of how far back you've gone. And listen, we've listened to you over many, many years of your feelings around Tottenham as a football club and how it's evolved and how it's changed. And like, I mean, you join us right now where there's been, as you are well aware, some frustration around the current season, certainly domestically. It's not often that we hit middle of January and Spurs are still in all the cup competitions, which obviously is a great thing. But I think it's fair to say it has been a very much up and down season. Before I do bring Shawnee in, I've got to ask you, you've covered a lot of managers there, as you've kind of illustrated since the Harry Redknapp days. Have you had a favourite, Jack, so far since covering the football club?
I'm not sure I should say I had a favourite. I really liked it under Mauricio Pochettino just because they were so good. Like the team was really good, and it felt like they were really they had such a great thing. It wasn't just that I liked Mauricio himself; it's that I liked that whole era where you had like the really young, hungry team, exciting side of play. All the fans were really into it. It felt like the whole club was really aligned. Like every bit of the club, the fans, the board, the players were all pulling in the same direction. And that's the most powerful thing you can have at a football club. And to be honest, I kind of feel like Spurs have spent the last 5 or 6 years trying to get that back, not very successfully, to be honest. And so that was such a unique feeling, really. Then on top of that, you've got the stadium, the run to the Champions League final, all the rest of it. But I'd say my favourite era for covering Tottenham was Pochettino.
Jack, thanks so much. I'm sure we'll have questions that will dip in and out of this show, but I'm going to hand over to Shawnee. It will kick us off on this latest edition of Last Word on Spurs. Shawnee, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. Jack, obviously it's been a better start. Some would say a marginally better start to 2025 than last year for Tottenham. 2 clean sheets on the bounce in Tottenham's last 2 games in the non-league competitions. Obviously, the first version of that being against arguably the best team in the world. It took a little bit longer, maybe a little bit too. It was very, more difficult than I think a lot of people had it down for on paper against Tamworth. A very impressive performance, a heroic display, some would say, from Tamworth that took us to extra time. The first 0-0 game that Tottenham has been involved in 89 games. I think that was against AC Milan, if I'm not mistaken, under Conte's reign.
Wow.
So a long time for a 0-0 in 90 minutes. We did eventually get the game tied up 3-0 when we brought on some of the bigger guns, shall we say. But look, a lot of the fan base went from, I guess, happy, very happy, glass half full after Liverpool, and then maybe resorted back to some of the concerns on Sunday, despite getting through Villa away in the 4th round, a tough draw. What's your overall take from the Tamworth performance, Jack?
I think that games like that is such a lose-lose. If you're a Premier League team going to a non-league team, like it's such a unique environment. With all due respect, it's the biggest game in Tamworth's history, or one of them, and it's really hard. But you've got the pitch, you've got the crowd on top of you. It's very difficult to play any football, and the players all knew that if they didn't win, that it would be totally humiliating for all of them and for the manager as well. So in my opinion, it's harsh to be like overly critical, overly analytical of the performance. Like, yeah, I'm not going to say Tottenham played well. They didn't play well at all. But I know some people are using it as a stick to beat the manager with. But I think, there's a lot of stuff you can criticize the manager for. There's a lot of bad performances from this season. But I actually think that Tamworth one is such a unique circumstance that I would personally not criticize the manager too much for that particular one.
I mean, Shawnee brings up there the Tamworth game, and what's obviously interesting again is when you look at some of those stats out there, Jack, that how the Spurs go from 5 days ago from being the top team in the Premier League and the Champions League, and then like we said that point there, Tamworth are 96 places below Tottenham, 16th in the National League. It just feels like this is kind of Tottenham in such a contrast between one performance to another. And I grant you right there. I think whatever would have happened during that 90 and a bit minutes, it was a bit of a no-win because Spurs were expected to win the game, and it would have been by how much they should have won the game. But that win does set up a fourth round tie away to Aston Villa. Spurs have won 6 of their last 10 occasions up there, and they've also scored 4 goals up there in back-to-back wins at Villa Park. So I'm just intrigued to make what you thought of the draw itself when that came out for Spurs, and whether we should be going to that quite optimistic. With a Villa side, if you agree, Jack, they found it very hard to replicate their domestic form last season, given their involvement in the Champions League and maybe having a bit more of an eye on that. What's your feeling about that next round of the FA Cup to come?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a great draw, is it? Just because it is straight after that Liverpool game as well. Like, I think that, given that Liverpool game was so big and Tottenham they're gonna give like all of their physical and emotional energy at Anfield that night. And then, they were probably thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have like a championship team at home a few days after that, rather than having to kind of get up to go for Villa. That said, I agree with you. I mean, I think Villa, this is not going to be Villa's priority this season. Villa, at this point, they would have just finished their 8-game Champions League phase, as we now have to call it. And I think it's going to be touch and go whether they're in the top 8 or whether they're through to the what I call the punishment round instead, which would be 2 more games in the middle of February. And and if they are through to the punishment round, that's got to be their priority, not this. So maybe they'll have to play the kids. So I guess from both perspectives, even though it is quite a big game, FA Cup 4th round, 2 big teams, I kind of feel like neither team is going to be their big priority, their big focus. So I think in both cases, we'll probably see quite a lot of changes, I think, for that game.
And just before he comes back in there, just want to ask you, Jack, about that second leg against Liverpool. Look, we've seen some of the greatest teams in the world go to Anfield, and well, obviously for Spurs it's in the Carabao Cup, but we've seen the likes of Real Madrid, Barcelona go to Liverpool with 3-0 leads in the past, have them evaporated very, very quickly. What's your gut feeling telling you about Tottenham taking a 1-0 lead to Anfield in that Carabao Cup? And look, hopefully they'll have players back, but we know even when they had all their players back during long periods of last season, and dare I say the start of this season, it didn't always materialise in results. How confident would you say you could see Tottenham reaching a first final in over nearly 5-6 years?
I think it's 50-50. I think it's a real coin flip. Obviously Spurs have got the lead, but you'd make Liverpool favourites for that tie, certainly. I kind of hope they have got Romero back. Van de Ven, I guess we'll just have to wait and see how serious his hamstring injury is. But yeah, I think the Spurs will have to go all in with all their best players and give it 110% and just hope that they can. They're going to have to score. I don't think they're going to grind out a 0-0 there. But if they score and then if they get Liverpool overcommitting, then maybe they can nick a bit on the break. It'll be huge if they did it. I wouldn't make them favourites, but I wouldn't be super shocked if they did it either.
We've just lost Shawnee. Shawnee's just cut out on his mic. Let's give Shawnee.
Sorry, is that better? Sorry.
We've got you, bud.
I've got two mute buttons. I've got the mute button on here and one on my mic, so I forget to do, whatever.
It's all technical.
Jack, just sort of pivoting back to the Tamworth game for a minute to sort of extrapolate that out. You kind of mentioned, it's a little bit harsh in your mind to go too heavy on the manager. I tend to agree. I think that against these sort of teams, it shouldn't matter what team you pick. It shouldn't matter. You should be able to field an 11 that, even if they had all the kids that should be able to compete. So for me, it comes down to who wants it more. And obviously Tamworth, right up for it, like you said, biggest game, their World Cup final. But there were some players. And so, sorry, on that by that extension, I would say that if I'm going to sort of point fingers, I would look more towards some of the players for, asking questions around why it is that they can't lift themselves to kind of outperform against players that they should be able to fairly easily do. And so I would ask you a couple of questions around some of the players that maybe did or didn't play in that regard. First off, Timo Werner, like a player that gets a hell of a lot of critique, a lot of criticism. Some would say fairly, some would say over the top of, from the Tottenham fans. Another disappointing display. Has been given the minutes, and either it's confidence or lack of quality, but for whatever reason, he's really not able to step up right now. There have been links with him this January with some sort of idea of termination of the loan, or even a kind of happy parting of ways if he was to move back to Germany towards Frankfurt or maybe other teams. Is there any chance? A lot of people have kind of put that out, and then some have said it's wide of the mark. Is there any chance at all that Tottenham might be able to see the back of him and save some of that wage expense before the end of the month, or is that sort of more dream world stuff from a Tottenham fan that doesn't particularly find the value in him, without being too disrespectful?
I think it would only be if they've got somebody, like a ready-made player to come straight in and replace him. Like Ange said, they don't have enough bodies at the moment. They don't. Like Werner is, not been great, really, if we're honest. 2 Premier League goals, I think, since they signed him. But he can still play there. He's experienced. You can put him straight into the team, and I don't think they would let him go unless they had like an experienced, like oven-ready player who comes straight in. I can't see them letting him go. Although clearly, like, it's not worked. It hasn't. No. He remains. The fact is, he remains the only Spurs player that Ange absolutely killed in public after that Rangers game in December, where he was terrible. Like, he was really bad. And absolutely destroyed him in the press conference afterwards. And has not done that to anybody else. So I think that does tell you something about him. But unless they can get like a ready to go replacement, I imagine they will probably just keep him for the rest of his loan.
Just quickly on that one before, because I would like to move on to Alfie Dorrington, a player that didn't play, but there was obviously rumours and I think concrete ones allegedly with him going to Aberdeen. But just quickly on that, Timo, to run off the topic there, is there any interest, that story about the Frankfurt links? They were out and then suddenly they were poo-pooed pretty soon afterwards. Is there any truth to the idea that there are other clubs that might be interested in him taking that loan away from us?
I have not heard anything to suggest that is the case. Like it might be that there's clubs out there that are interested. I have not heard anything to say that there are clubs who are interested. Frankly, his record at Spurs isn't great. Salary, he'll be on a fair bit of money. I don't imagine that clubs will be, queuing around the block to take him. But you never know. Sometimes teams get desperate in January and they just want like an experienced name who can come straight in. So maybe that will change, but I've not heard anything to suggest that at the moment.
Fair enough, mate. I appreciate that. Moving back on to Alfie Dorrington, as I said, the story's out there. He's maybe going to Aberdeen, or I think he is going to Aberdeen, but he did sign a new contract, I believe, yesterday, long-term contract with the club. So delighted for him in that regard. And with that in mind, how do Tottenham fans, or how should Tottenham fans feel about the intended future use of Dorrington? What does that loan move to Aberdeen look like, in your opinion? Is it a good place to move? Obviously, he's coming back from some serious injuries last year. I think his hamstring injury that required surgery. It's been a long time out for him, but a lot of high hopes from him for those in the club. Like I say, that he hasn't got the minutes. He didn't get the chance against Tamworth. And obviously now with the new contract and the likely move to Aberdeen, how should Tottenham fans interpret the future use with Alfie?
Good, I think. I think he probably just needs to play. I think he probably needs, that experience of men's football with a bit more on the line than you get in like youth team football. Generally speaking, it's only the super talented players who can go straight from youth football into first team football at a big club without having to go on a loan. Obviously, like that's Mikey Moore's pathway, isn't it? At the moment, like he's gone straight from the youth teams into the first team without having to go on loan. But in the main, like normal, Mikey Moore's a kind of special talent, isn't he? Like I think what you might call normal players, they generally have to go on loan. So it'll be really interesting to see how he does that. It's going to be very, very challenging. Remember that James Maddison went on loan to Aberdeen from Norwich City after they bought him from Coventry City in about 2017, 2018-ish. I think he did really well there. They thought it was like the kind of toughening up experience that he needed, and he did great. So maybe, obviously Dorrington and Maddison are different types of player at different stages of their career, but maybe it could be a really good thing for Dorrington, and he might learn a lot while he's there.
Jack, thank you so much for that. We talk about obviously players and their futures and the fact that maybe some haven't had more opportunities than others. I just wonder where we are at with regards to Will Lancashire right now. It was an interesting case because it felt maybe in that Tamworth game that would have been maybe the perfect opportunity to give Will a bit of game time. That obviously never materialised. And I just wonder, look, we did see obviously that bit of a head loss in Turkey when playing Galatasaray. And I thought what I picked up from Ange's presser after the game we played against Tamworth is that what he very much praised the players for was keeping their heads where there was a concern that maybe some would have lost theirs, given just how long it took Tottenham to break Tamworth down, which still feels really weird saying that, Tottenham to break Tamworth down. I mean, I just wonder, just with regards to Will Lancashire, do you imagine that he will get more game time this second half of the season, or could you see a way if Tottenham were to maybe look to bring in another forward that would give Will Lancashire the opportunity maybe to go out on loan? What's your feelings on that, Jack?
I'd be surprised if he gets a lot more football in the Tottenham first team in the second half of the season, to be honest. I just think that, there's no margin for error in these big cup games. Like Spurs have got to keep getting through. I think it's too serious to play somebody with that little experience, I think. And so I think unless he goes on loan this month, and again, I haven't heard anything to suggest that is the case, although, things do change at the end of the window. I imagine that he's going to have to get a loan to get that experience, because again, like as a young centre forward, like he's just not going to get thrown in, really, is he? Like he's not he's not really a competitor to Solanke. And to be honest, I think when you look at this season, I think Spurs need an experienced, reliable competitor to Solanke, like somebody else who can play number 9. And that's somebody more experienced than Lancashire, and it's somebody more reliable than Richarlison. It's somebody who they can actually use, because they don't have it. And so Solanke, who I think has been brilliant, he's having to run himself into the ground, isn't he? He's having to play even games where he doesn't start. He has to come on and help out everyone else, just like we saw at Tamworth. It's happened, not the first time that's happened this season. So yeah, I'd say experienced number 9 alternative, a kind of like Llorente type player, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what's interesting, Shawnee? I'll go to Shawnee in a second, but you bring up there, Jack, Dominic Solanke. I think from a lot of Tottenham fans in general, they've been thoroughly pleased with his signing. Take out goal ratio or input at the moment, but in terms of the physicality and the work rate that he does in a Tottenham shirt, I think some of our biggest concerns is, I think I've heard you say on the roof from the lane as well, if him or Kulusevski go down in these next few weeks to an injury, I mean, that could be potentially a real crush towards Spurs' second half of the season. How would you rate so far Solanke's stint in a Tottenham shirt? Because I just think he's been phenomenal. And I think with better service, Jack, he'd even have a better goal return. What's your take on that for you?
I think he's been great. I think he works so hard. His running is completely integral to how they want to play. Like he really sets the tone for the pressing. He makes that first run, and then the other teammates follow in behind him. I think also, like, with the ball, I think he's a good finisher. He scored some very good goals. I think he helps the team attack. He holds on to the ball in the opposition half, which Spurs really struggled to do last season. When he drops deep, he can play forward passes in a sort of Harry Kane style. So yeah, I think he's a brilliant player, and I think in a better functioning team, I think he would have scored a lot more goals. I don't think it's his fault he's not scored goals. I just think the team's not really clicked as it properly this season. So yeah, I think he's been great. Really, really good player.
Just quickly on that, just to give my sort of take. I feel like Dominic Solanke gets a hard time from a lot of fans for maybe some of them don't necessarily want to see the output in terms of, or the effort, the input, I guess, maybe the hard work he puts in. But even in terms of output, it just, given that this system, the way I interpret it, is more of a like a workhorse, everyone's pulling together, trying to where the sum is greater than the parts. I still think is he 17 GA in 27 appearances? I know some of those are assists, and I know some of those are in Europe and things, so maybe it's not all Premier League, which is where the kind of rubber meets the road. But if people criticise his output, I think the output for half a season, 17 GA, is still pretty phenomenal. I don't know if anyone, Ricky or Jack, if you would disagree with that.
No, I totally agree. I think, I really feel for Solanke. What I think, Jack, you pointed back to, which I'm sure will come on in the second half of the show, is what I think he's really missing is someone just to give him a bit of a rest and also to give him a bit more service. I think there's no doubt about it that if he had, take Kulusevski out of it for 1 second, if he had somebody else either alongside him or behind him that could supply him those balls in behind, I think we'd see even more goals for Dominic Solanke. I just think he's been really unlucky that he's not had someone that's been in that position more to give him the opportunities. But I think what we've seen with Solanke is 7 times out of 10, if I'm being fair on that point, he will find the back of the net. I know he had those first couple of games at the start of the season. I think the Leicester game where you'd argue he maybe should have scored. There's been the odd game against Fulham, for example. You maybe argue he should have scored. But I think, like we've said, more than anything right now, he just needs a bit more support. And goes back to Ange's comments, which we'll come on to. He does need some help both internally and externally. So we'll see where that comes. And I'll hand back to Shawnee.
Yeah, Jack, with that, it's a great segue from Ricky there towards the support. There is a player that we have signed recently. None of us have seen him yet in terms of in a Tottenham shirt, in Min-hyuk. I'm never sure if I say his name correctly. I just call him Yang. I can't wait to see him. An unused sub in the Liverpool game. I don't think he made the matchday squad. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one. For Tamworth. Obviously, someone that maybe you could make the argument has been brought in to kind of extend the product life cycle of that relationship with the Korean fans. Maybe that's not too cynical, but obviously a guy with real talent from the highlight reels that I've seen. Jack, is there any kind of end goal in mind where we think we're going to first see this guy in a Tottenham shirt? Any chance in the Arsenal game, or is it something where we have to wait a little bit longer before we get to see this man unleashed in the great white shirt of Tottenham Hotspur?
I would say probably a bit longer. I think that I just don't think it's like in Ange's nature to throw in talented young player that early on, particularly in a really big game. I think he would rather wait until he's 100+% certain before doing it. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to watching him play soon. I don't know exactly when that would be. Again, it's this is why maybe it's a shame they got Aston Villa away in the FA Cup fourth round, because if they've got an easier time at home, then maybe that's the time that you can see Lancashire, you can see Yang, you can see some of the younger players. But yeah, really look forward to seeing him. Equally, we've all got to accept the fact that this is a big change in the middle of the season to go from the Korean League straight into the Premier League. And obviously, remember that when they signed Sonny had been playing the Bundesliga for a few years, hadn't he? He'd been playing for Hamburg, he'd been playing for Bayer Leverkusen, so he'd got that grounding in European football. It's much more, it's much more physical. It's much more kind of intense, I'd imagine, than the Korean League. So Son had that kind of a really good, he had the sort of staging post, I guess, for his development between Korea and the Premier League, whereas Yang has come straight from the Korean League into English football. So I imagine it's going to be, it's not going to be a super smooth and easy transition for him. So I think, I guess I'd say that everybody needs to be a little bit patient with this kid because he's new to it, and it's going to be a big adjustment.
It's interesting because I feel like with Yang, it's a bit of a different case to the likes of Mickey van der Ven and Kinsky, where, I mean, if you remember, I think we threw Mickey van der Ven in within 2 or 3 days of him signing into that Brentford game. You could argue Tottenham really needed a centre-back given that game. And similar to, obviously, the situation around Kinsky and the fact Spurs needed somebody that was going to come in and make a difference straight away. He has done. I think you're going on the lines there, Jack. It's a little bit different with Yang, given the fact he's coming from, with no disrespect when I say this, a totally different league in Korea where it's going to take a bit of an adaptation period to the Premier League. And I think, like you said there, Jack, that's going to take a little bit of time, right? It wouldn't be wrong to think it may need until maybe, I don't know, the next couple of weeks where I say things will settle down, but they don't today. I mean, I have to ask you this, Jack. Spurs are playing every 3-4 days. I mean, it's funny. Ange last season can play. We don't have enough games. Now it feels like we've gone from one end to another. I mean, is it a pretty crazy schedule for you as well at the moment at the Athletic?
Yeah, pretty crazy. I was off for the second half of December, so I didn't do a game between. So I did the Rangers game away in Glasgow, and then I missed like 5 or 6 games and came back for the Newcastle game. So I had a bit of a break. So it's not as tough for me as it is for some people out there. You know, and I'm sure you can just tell by watching them play. The players are knackered. The players are absolutely knackered, particularly the best players like Kulusevski and Solanke, who I think have been by miles the best players in the last few months. They're exhausted because they're having to do it twice a week, every week. And I think, like everybody could do with it. And the more injuries they have, the more the guys who don't get injured, it's even harder for them because they've got to, there's no one they can share the burden with, is there? Like they just have to keep going and going and going. And maybe when but even then, like when the injured players come back, like Romero, Van der Ven, Davis, Udogie, they've got a lot of injured defenders, but the attacking players they've got injured, like basically Odobert, Richarlison, they're not going to replace Solanke and Kulusevski, are they? So like Solanke and Kulusevski will still have to play every single game. So I think everybody's just praying that they don't get injured, aren't they? Because those guys are so integral to how the team plays at the moment, and they've been. I think those two have been absolutely heroic for the last few months.
Yeah, I do agree on that point. Look, we're going to squeeze in our first break of the show for our listeners and audio. We've got nearly over 4,000 of you that are watching the show live. Thanks so much, as always, for your incredible support for the show. I'm joined by my new co-host for 7 days, and we're going strong. It's a new marriage that we're working on. I've had the other one for 15 years. I won't comment on that one. That's still going okay for now. I'm joined by the wonderful Sean Butler at the Spurs Talk Show back alongside us here. I'd like to have Shawnee back alongside me. And also making his return to Last Word on Spurs over what's been about a year and a half hiatus away, which has been joy, which has been fun, which has been covering the soap opera, which is Tottenham. We're joined by View from the Lane legend, Jack Pitt-Brooke, and also, of course, football reporter, journalist that has been covering Spurs for far too long, as he's told us at the start. But Jack, I have to say, and I don't mean to flatter you, you still look incredibly young to be carrying or to be covering this football club for how long you've done it. I mean, God, when I think about the times where I heard a recent episode of You from the Lane where you guys spoke about the Pochettino sacking and just how nobody expected that one to come. And It's like 7:20. It was never like expected to happen. If you remember at the time, I mean, this is just going back.
Yeah,
5,
that
6
was
years
pretty
ago.
mad. I think everybody
Crazy.
knew there had been like crisis talks, and it's all quite. But I didn't actually think they'd sack. I have to say, I didn't think they'd sack him, and I should have known. Like it's my job to know, and I didn't know. So whereas that one with like Conte, and you could tell they were coming to the end. Jose, Nuno was never going to get off the ground, that one. Whereas I still think, and also because Mauricio had been there 5 years, and like the Champions League final was only 6 months beforehand or whatever. So that, to me, that is still the most shocking and surprising one. And even if they sack Ange at some point this season, I don't think they will. But if they did, it just wouldn't be a surprise on the level of the Pochettino one, because the Pochettino one was so surprising.
It's fascinating when you see the way this club has pivoted from different managers, different styles, and the fact that, let's be honest about it, I think, Jack, you kind of said it in your opening there, we are still really searching for what we've lost 5.5, 6 years ago, of having a manager that could really reunite the fan base. And to be fair, look, while Spurs are still in all cup competitions, I think we can also say domestically it hasn't been the start to the season that many of us anticipated, many of us wanted. Look, I'm sure you're acutely aware, Jack, Spurs at the moment, in terms of turning our attention to Ange in a domestic league form, we're without a win. Well, at home, our worst home league run. This is since the 93-94 season. We're 2 points from a possible 18. We've lost half the games that we've played. It's, again, that point, 10 defeats in 20, 12th in the Premier League. Spurs currently, they're 12 points off the current top 4. They're 8 points off the relegation places. How would you, Jack, sum up Spurs' start to the domestic season? And are we already at a point, Jack, in your mind where it's the cups or bust for Tottenham?
I think it has to be the cups or bust. I think they've left themselves too much to do in the league. Like the gap between Tottenham and 5th, never mind 4th, is too big. Like they're not going to come in the top 5. And it's really bad. Like, people should be allowed to say that as well. Like it's really bad for Tottenham to be losing 50% of their league games. This is a team who they came 5th last year. I think everybody was thinking, right, well, they've got to build on that and aim for 4th this year. And instead, the league form has been disastrously bad. And I think people, we've all just got to admit and accept that to a degree. But yeah, I do think it's cups or bust. I'm not, I've still got quite a lot of hope. They're in 3 competitions, which is good. They're obviously, they're in a good position in the League Cup. They're in the semi-final. The second leg is coming up in a few weeks' time. They're 1-0 up, so that's good. Europa League started pretty well, 6 games in. I think they've got, I'd say, probably slightly better than 50% chance of coming in that top 8, which means no punishment round, straight through to the proper knockouts. And then the FA Cup, not an easy 4th round draw, to be honest, but Villa have got big fish to fry as well. So I'm reasonably confident that Tottenham can continue to progress, as long as they don't get knocked out of all 3 in the next month or 2, which would be a disaster. I think that they can continue. They've just got to make sure that they're in at least one competition, I'd say, in March and April, and that will really keep people on board. I think, to be honest, that'll probably keep the manager in his job.
I have to ask you, Jack, before Shawnee comes back in there, are you surprised by where Spurs find themselves domestically this season? A lot of talk under the first season under Ange is really trying to figure out what parts of the furniture you want to keep and then try and build on that furniture. I think the general feeling was a lot of fans felt like this. I mean, again, I can't speak for everybody, but the summer window to some felt a little underwhelming. Look, I mean, we know Spurs, they really brought only in one established player that at the time was going to directly impact the first team in Dominic Solanke. I think it's fair to say that Archie Gray and Lucas Bergvall have worked their way into the team now, and it may feel towards the end of the season they're 2 players that simply can't be dropped because of how much of an influence they've had on the team. But when you look back at the summer visits Tottenham did to where they find themselves in this season, did that ever correlate in your mind that we'd be having this chat with you on the middle of January and I'd be saying to you Tottenham 12th in the table? Did that ever enter your mind?
No, it never occurred to me in April that Tottenham would be 12th. I thought I was probably a bit naive about the summer window. I think I came out the summer window thinking, well, I remember thinking, well, I think they should have bought an extra midfielder, but they do have a lot of options in there, so it'll probably be okay. I was a bit naive about how thin they were in defence. They've only really three centre backs plus Davis who can fill in there. Like that's not really enough. I was also naive about how much harder it would be given they're in Europe this season. Obviously, they weren't in Europe last season, so they got by with a thin squad. This season in Europe, particularly playing such a physically demanding style of play like they do, it was always going to be really tough. I think I should have been a bit more critical about the window at the time. In hindsight, Graham Bergvall, brilliant signings. I think they're going to be incredible players for Tottenham over the next 5 years. But is that exactly what Ange needed for this season? Given the diet, given the calendar, given the thinness of the squad, given the style of play, I don't know. I mean, I think he probably needed Graham Bergvall and one or two others. Certainly another centre back or left back. Even in goal, like we all, Kinsky's a fantastic buy. Everybody knew they were taking a risk. They were taking a risk going into this season without a backup keeper who could kick, and that got exposed, and they had to play Forster for a month or two, which they would never have wanted to do, but they had to do it because they didn't get Kinsky in until January. In hindsight, they should have got Kinsky in the summer, but then Kinsky wasn't the same player. So yeah, I do think they did leave themselves a bit exposed. And I think in hindsight, I'd be lying if I said I called it in August. I actually wish that I had called it. Or I wish that I had seen these problems coming in advance.
Jack, just popping back a little bit here to Ange Postecoglou with what you just said around the kind of the naivety from the manager, the naivety from the club to not go into the season with the necessary strength in depth to be able to ride through the complexity of what always seems to happen with Tottenham, but it happens to all clubs, the injuries that do occur, and of course the added pressure of the additional games through Europe. I think last season was our fewest games ever. I think this season, if we do go deep in all the competitions, will possibly be one of the most games that we've ever played. And ultimately, obviously, we do have this compounding effect of multiple injuries to the same department of the team, I guess, at the same time. With that being said, where do you land when we sort of think about managers at Tottenham, how much time they traditionally have been given, not just at Tottenham, but the average tenure of a manager in the Premier League is, I don't know if 18 months is around, give or take the right number. He's already past that point. Daniel Levy seems to be making inroads or intimations that he's backing the manager. Is some of that backing because he has, he's invested so much into the squad and wants to see this project through and truly believes? Or is it maybe because he has some sympathy for the fact that the squad has been so catastrophically decimated through injuries at the same time? And ultimately, I guess that the kind of rounding off question here is, how much time does Ange really have in your mind to sort of turn that sort of large oil tanker around and get us back onto a right footing? We are doing well in the cups, but the league, as you guys were talking about just a second ago, the league doesn't lie, and it's not looking pretty.
Such a good question, this, because I think this is going to really inform what decisions are made in the second half of the season. The fact is, he's been there long in terms of, if you measure by league games, he's been there longer than Jose or Conte. But then you got to remember, Jose or Conte is they were brought in to get instant success. They had I think they had a better squad. They had certainly a much more experienced squad. Not just, they had Pete Kane, they had Pete Son, they had other experienced winners. Players like Dyer, Lloris, Højbjerg. So they had a ready-made squad with experienced players, and the manager could come straight in. The expectation was they would get instant results. And obviously, with Jose, there was a little bit of it kind of went up for a bit, then it went down. With Conte, it actually went up a lot. They were really, there's no getting past the fact that Tottenham were really, really good for Conte from November 2021 until May 2022, that first half season. But as soon as things started to fade, both managers got sacked, didn't they? Because I think in both cases, people knew, well, if it's getting worse already, it's not going to get better again, is it? You only get kind of one shot with these kind of short-term win right now managers. And if it's already getting worse, then it's over, basically. Whereas Ange is, that's not why Ange is there, is it? Ange isn't there for short-term success. He's not there for a kind of short-term hit. He's there to build something. And so that means that you can't judge him in quite the same way. You can't judge him after 18 months. Because if you did judge him after 18 months, like, he's obviously doing an objectively worse job than Conte or Mourinho. Like, Ange's points per game compared to Conte's points per game or Mourinho's points per game, Ange's nowhere near those guys. Like, Ange's, they're doing pretty badly.
Well, 1.20 Ange's points per game at the moment, which is lower than Christian Gross, Jack.
Exactly, yeah. It's a great stat.
You cover the club, luckily. I mean, I don't want to be like covering the club of the Christian Gross days. Good,
you did that quickly, didn't you? But yeah, like, you can tell. So you're not judging him in the same way, and also, like, he's doing this with a much less experienced squad than the previous Tottenham managers have had. So he doesn't really have the tools. But equally, there will come a point where they have to say, right, but we've got to judge him now. Like, I imagine it will probably come at the end of this season. I imagine that at the end of the season, they'll say, right, he's had 2 whole seasons. He has got a 3rd season on his contract. Do we feel like he's earned the right to have that 3rd year of his contract? And to be honest, right now, I'd say it depends on the cups. Like, it's probably a coin flip whether he is still the manager at the start of next season or not. Like, is he going to be in the dugout in August? It's like, he probably has to win a trophy or at least get to a final, I think, because he's not going to, the league form alone, that is not going to justify him being the manager next season. Far from it.
Well, he's doubled down on the fact, hasn't he, that he always wins a trophy in his 2nd season. Before Shawnee comes back in there, I just have to ask you, I mean, you've kind of already answered my point there, Jack. I was going to ask you what you feel the tipping point would be with regards to Ange's future at Tottenham. I think you've made it very clear there that he does need to have some predominant success in the Cups this season. If with our league form right now, it's going to remain as it is, which has really been inconsistent and such up and down. I would love to ask you, from somebody that's been in a lot of those press conferences, the likes of a lot of your colleagues, the likes, of course, of obviously Charlie Eccleshare beforehand and Jay at the moment there at The Athletic, what you make of Ange as a character to sit in those pressers and be like, because it does feel in the last couple of months that he has been, I think, naturally a bit more tetchy, if that's the right word, a little bit more prickly when it comes to the media. Have you? I feel like Jack, can I be honest? I feel like I've asked you this question under Jose's time, under Conte's time, under Nuno's time. What have you made of Ange Postecoglou, the manager, in comparison to when he first started at Tottenham? Because I think many of him is a kind of cuddly bear, which he never wanted to be kind of associated like that. But he said in the recent weeks, people seem to be liking to poke the bear. So what's your take in how you're finding him in the moment in the pressers?
I like him. I think he's a smart, interesting guy. He's got interesting, I mean, from a sort of journalist perspective, he's great because he's got interesting opinions. He's clever. He's not afraid to tell you what he thinks, and he can always back it up. So I like talking to him. I like hearing what he has to say. He can be very prickly. He can be very grumpy. I think he's often on the lookout for if he thinks a journalist is trying to catch him out, and if he thinks you're trying to catch him out, he'll try and catch you out back. So there's quite a lot of back and forth. I don't mind that personally. Sometimes I think he can come across a bit rude, not so much with us, but particularly, post-match interview on TV, snapping at questions. We've all seen it happen quite a few times before. That said, he's not the first manager in football to be a bad loser. Jurgen Klopp, I thought, was a terrible loser. I would often be, I thought, quite rude to TV interviewers after games. So it's not, this is not a thing that's unique to Ange. Although I do think when you see him like that, like the whole kind of cuddly bear narrative, which you mentioned earlier, I don't really think that's accurate. I don't think he's like nicer or less nice than any other manager, but you don't get to be in that position without being incredibly single-minded and very, very sure of yourself and very, very confident and very ruthless. And again, these are not traits that are unique to Postecoglou, but equally, I think this kind of idea that he's this like cuddly Aussie uncle doesn't really get to grips with what he's actually like.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's fascinating to get your insight there, Jack. I'm always sort of toing and throwing, I think is the phrase, on how I sort of vibe with the press conferences. I never really know if it's the right way to handle it or otherwise, but he always says the right thing. I'm just not always sure if the tone in which he says it sometimes can come across a little bit snarky. But sometimes I get like a shiver from the way that he can put his words and sentences together. They're brilliantly inspirational when he's in the right mood. But listen,
he can be so good at that. Like he's so good at saying the right things. I think on camera particularly to like get a message across to the fans and stuff. Like he's an absolute master at that. Sorry,
yeah, he really is. Really is. No, yeah, I wish I had the words, the skill set in his like he has to be able to put across the right questions to you, Jack. Let me ask you this, buddy. I think this is the last question I'm going to ask you about players that are currently in the squad before we move forward towards some of the transfer targets. I do want to ask about Big Tony Kinsky, Antonin Kinsky. We spoke a minute ago about, I guess, the difficulty in figuring out how to judge Big Ange with the injuries that he's had to face. And obviously, I can't think of a manager that's lost his first two choice goalkeepers to injury, at least at the same time for many other teams in the Premier League. But with the signing of Big Tony, I'm going to call him Big Tony Kinsky, 2 clean sheets in 2 games, absolute dream debut for him against Liverpool, the best team in the world. Did well on an artificial pitch where the ball can bounce and can sort of catch weird or unconventional bounces, I should say. Sort of 180 minutes without conceding. Brilliant start, brilliant debut for him. What's your take on Kinsky? Is he, how have you felt about his introduction to life in Tottenham? His confidence with the ball at his feet. It looks like the fans have taken to him absolutely fantastically. But I guess one of the questions I'd like to, or the extension question, I guess, would be not just how you feel about his introduction, but what happens when Vicario, who magically was out of his brace, out of his cast, was sort of doing laps around the pitch, trying to show the keeper that trying to show Big Ange that he's ready. I just wonder, how do you feel, and how do you see Ange looking at the two of them when both are fit, which surely won't be too far away? It's quite a nice headache to have.
Yeah, I think Kinsky's amazing. Like I thought, I hadn't heard of him, and before that the day when they played Newcastle, wasn't it, when they signed him? But then at that Liverpool game, I thought it was one of the best debuts by a goalkeeper I've ever seen. And what really struck me is in the first 3 or 4 minutes, just when he'd get the ball and he'd be passing it around around the Spurs defense, you could tell within seconds, like the Spurs players must have known how good he was, right? Because they've been training with him all week. So that it can't have been a surprise to them. And you can see how confident they were, just like letting him have the ball. Whereas with Fraser Forster, there was always this kind of, no disrespect to Fraser Forster, but that's just not his game. And so the players would be a bit unsure about whether or not they could lend him the ball. But then what was amazing to me was seeing all the fans just like relax, because the fans have been so on edge, obviously, for the last few months. And you could see the whole South End relax, but you could also see them, like they almost wanted him to get on the ball because they just enjoyed watching him. And he'd do things like clip that one pass out that kind of whistled over Salah's head, or like drilling like that kind of low flat one like Ederson all the way up to Solanke to chest down the halfway line. Like this guy is so good. He's so technically good with his feet. He's so confident. He doesn't make any mistakes. Even didn't he kind of lift the ball over? Was it Salah's head or Jota's head? Like ridiculous. So yeah, I think he's brilliant. Great to watch. Perfect fit for the style of play. Really exciting signing. They've done really well to get him as well, because if they'd left this till the summer, they would have, everybody in Europe would have been queuing up to sign him, and Tottenham have got them. So really, really good. The question about Kinsky versus Vicario, this is going to be one of the big talking points for Tottenham in 2025, I think. I'd be lying if I said I know how it's going to go. Like, they're both really good keepers. Neither of them wants to be number 2, I don't think. I can't. It's very difficult to call. Like, I don't think Kinsky's come to be number 2. Equally, Vicario's only been there a year and a half, and he's not really done anything wrong. I hate to say this, so don't take this the wrong way. It does remind me a little bit of Raya and Ramsdale at Arsenal.
Wow, okay.
Ramsdale came in, did really, really well for a bit, and then they upgraded, and it was pretty uncomfortable for a while. But it's clear that it was pretty clear. It was quickly clear that Raya was first choice over Ramsdale. Now, I'm not predicting that'll happen because I don't know what's going to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like, not many, generally teams have a number 1, don't they? Like, even if you have ideally you want a really good number 2 like Kelleher or Ortega or someone, but you don't really have like 2 equal number 1s. You generally have a number 1 and a 2. But I don't know how it's going to play out at Tottenham, but they're in a good position because they've finally got 2 good goalkeepers for the first time in a while.
I got to say, Jack, I hadn't thought of it like that really until you mentioned it. But I mean, it has been, as you know, there's been certain reservations about Vicario from I wouldn't say there has been a situation obviously around corners of last season really that since the Goodison Park fixture with Everton, we couldn't ever really get to grips with him on corners. And I have to say this, I know it's only 180 minutes as Shawnee said there. He has looked so convincing so far, Kinsky, that, right now it'd be really hard just to see Vicario just come back in as the automatic number one, but it has only been 180 minutes. But I agree with you. It's going to be fascinating to see how that battle does play out because I think it was one of those weird things you saw at the end of the Liverpool game where Vicario went up to Kinsky and gave him a big hug, but begrudgingly he must have thought, here he is, the fellow who nicked my job. I mean, it was like one of those really awkward situations where you do wonder how that will look in 6 months' time and how that will plan out. So it'll be fascinating to see it. It really will be. But I'll hand back to Shawnee because I know we're pressing up against vital time here. I'll hand back to you, Shawnee.
Thanks, Ricky. Yeah, Jack, we're going to get into the kind of nitty-gritty, the stuff that I think everyone's can't wait to see. It's a transfer window. I think before we get into the specific names, let's sort of talk about what you heard regarding the intentions. Obviously, we got the goalkeeper done very early. I'm actually amazed that Tottenham got that one done under the radar. No one had really sort of saw it coming. I don't know if that's going to happen with the other positions. With outfield players, maybe it's most of the kind of known players that are out there, probably common names to everyone that's out, in the scouting departments of all the teams in the Premier League. But can you give us any insight into where it is that Tottenham are specifically looking? A lot of the kind of rumours, a lot of the press, a lot of people like yourself are saying that it's a forward, clearly a forward, whether it's a versatile one. Ange loves versatility over specificity. Obviously some defensive coverage, again, maybe versatility with a centre-back that can play left and a left full-back. But is there any other kind of positions? Are we looking for a midfielder? A lot of Tottenham fans would hope for a monster six. Is there any sort of space in this January to get that done as well? What have you heard in regards the positions that Tottenham are looking to give Ange that support in?
Well, there's kind of no secrets here. Like there's no secrets about what Tottenham need. Like they need another defender, preferably who can, who's left-footed. I think who can play at least one at a centre back and left back. I think they probably need at least one other forward player. You might think they need a number 9, like we mentioned earlier on the show. I think they need an alternative to Richarlison. Someone who can really be a good number 2 to Solanke, take a bit of the pressure off Solanke. I think they probably also need another winger. They need, the fact is, Odegaard, no fault of his own, but he's not played. And I think they need somebody like Mikey Moore is just a kid and he's had 2 months out with this virus. They need a bit more. I think they need another winger who's good in 1v1 to create chances and everything. Now it might be that you can sign, does that mean you sign a player who can do all of that stuff on the front line? You need 2 different players. I think it will depend. I think at that point it will depend who's on the market. I don't think Tottenham are going to be attacking this market with hundreds of millions of pounds. I think they'll have to wait. They will wait and see which players are out there. I think they'll take a very methodical, process-led approach under Johan Lange. We all know that since Lange came in October of last year, it's they want to do things the right way. It's much more about data and being very thorough, and obviously works with number 2 Rob McKenzie, who's been there, who was there before, and it's all kind of very much joined up thinking. Whereas with Paratici, it was much more it was kind of driven by contacts and who does he know and his own personal network and his own relationships with people, with agents and clubs. And I think Paratici brought Tottenham some amazing players. So I'm not knocking his approach. But what they're doing at the moment under Johan Lange is a lot more I'd say it's a lot more process-led. It's a lot less flashy. I don't think that he kind of courts media attention the same way that Paratici did. So Lange has a slightly different personal approach from Paratici. But yeah, so they'll be going about it in their own way. And also the other thing about how Johan Lange goes about his business is they try and keep everything, everything stays pretty secret until they do it. When they signed Werner last year, nobody really knew about it until the day of the deal. When they signed Odegaard in the summer, nobody knew about it until the day of the deal. And again, when they signed Kinsky in this last week or the week before, nobody knew about it until 24 hours before. So Lange very much likes to work with absolute secrecy and absolute privacy Whereas Paratici was always a little bit like, it was never super secret what Paratici was up to, because he'd love to kind of let people know what he was up to. Whereas Lang is a bit different, I think. So that means that, sometimes I think everyone has to be a little bit more patient and kind of wait and see what who Tottenham are going to end up with, because they, Langer likes to kind of keep his cards close to his chest.
It must make everyone's job in your world a little bit difficult to conduct, right? If you don't know you can't put any kind of weight behind any rumours, because if it's Johan Langer's style to keep
Tottenham want to keep things super private, so it's a bit different than when there's lots of rumours flying around all the time.
So I don't know then if that's the case, if that therefore, when you do hear a rumour, you might as well kind of ignore them, because like you say, if that's Johan Langer's style, then the fact that we're linked with the likes of Itakura at Borussia Mönchengladbach, the likes of Christensen over in Italy, the likes of Patrick Dorgu, a player that I think has amazing potential, and I think he's a wonderful fit. Dorgu over in Lecce, he can play left back, left midfield, left winger, can invert the full, invert over on the right wing. Played most of the season as a right winger. When I see these links, I get very excited, because I would love to see some of these players come into Tottenham, but. I guess if it is Langer that's leading the charge for some of these players or some of these targets, then the fact that they're in the zeitgeist, does that mean that we should kind of ignore them, or can you give us any kind of insight onto whether there's any kind of strength to those particular names?
Yeah, it's just very difficult. I mean, I wish I had a good answer for you, but I kind of don't have like a full answer to that, because it will, Tottenham like to act under a sort of cloak of secrecy at the moment in the transfer window. So they will be, they will very much be saying, right, like, what are we looking for? Who's got the best data? Who have we watched? They'll be going through the data, they'll be going through the scout reports. They'll be doing an awful lot of work behind the scenes. Like, these guys are not sitting on their hands by any means. And then when they find a player who they think they can do the deal for, they'll be trying to move very fast to do the deal before anybody else. But they're always, everything is geared towards, we've got to keep everything super private until the moment that we can pull the trigger and sign the player. And so I'd be lying if I said that I can tell you that those, the names that you've listed, the names that are like in the public domain at the moment, are necessarily going to be the ones that Tottenham end up shooting for.
It's interesting, Jack, because again, we look at, touch upon midfielders. It's an area where Spurs are obviously now developing the likes of Archie Gray, Lucas Bergvall, that are looking to find young players for the future. And there has been some links around the window to the likes of David Frattesi. I know that appeared a lot during the Paratici, period of where he was really constructing what was behind the scenes at Tottenham in terms of the players. There's been Douglas Luiz, also that's been mentioned, that could be available on loan, depending on how this window pans out towards the end of it. And there's this interesting link around Johnny Cardoso. I don't know whether you've ever, Jack, seen a situation around a player where Spurs at the end of the January transfer window, indications from, again, reports, I don't think Tottenham ever confirmed this. I don't think we've ever seen this confirmed, and Jack, you can verify this if so. But Spurs have this first option on the player. I mean, you'd imagine everybody has the first option on a player if they go and put the money down on somebody. I mean, what does that mean in football in terms for you around the Johnny Cardoso link on the back end of last summer, where Spurs had got this first option on the player? Do you take anything away from that, Jack?
Yeah, I actually can't confirm this with certainty. The Cardoso situation, I found it to be, I've never quite got to the absolute bottom of it, so I wouldn't want to say something on here that I wasn't 100+% certain of. On Cardoso, suffice to say that clearly, midfield remains something which Spurs, I think they'll probably be okay for this season, although I imagine that in the summer they might want to have another look at their options in midfield. And I think they could do an improvement, but I think they might struggle to. I mean, it's difficult time to sign immediate improvement players in January.
Jack, just there's another name obviously out there in the forward line. We have spoken, obviously. I completely appreciate your honesty with regards to how difficult it is to know because of the format in which Tottenham conduct their business. But one of the public domain names that has been linked not just with Tottenham, with Juve, with Manchester United, is Kolo Muani. Now I've been sort of looking at these stories all week with regards United's interest in Muani, and if we consider, I don't know if there is any truth to this story, if you can shed any light, but the idea that Tottenham are also potentially linked to Marcus Rashford. And then the only way that United could really get involved in the Muani deal is if they could find a way to offload Marcus Rashford from their wage bill. And it looks like one of the only clubs outside of maybe Saudi Arabia, and from what I gathered, let me know if this is true, but he doesn't want to go in that direction. Therefore, one of the only teams in the Premier League that have shown any interest, if it is true, is Tottenham in Rashford. To me, it's a kind of like a weird chicken and the egg that doesn't make any sense. Why would Tottenham, if Muani's a target, be also thinking about Rashford if the only way that Manchester United, who are a competitor for Muani's signature, can really compete with Tottenham is by offloading Rashford, of which we are one of the main interested parties? Like, to me, it's a weird thing that doesn't make any sense. Can you shed any light? Is there truth to Tottenham's interest in Rashford? Is there truth to Muani? Obviously, Juve are still in the hunt. What's going on with that whole kind of merry-go-round of forward attackers, buddy?
I would be very surprised if Rashford ended up at Tottenham. Yeah, like Tottenham and Man United next to each other in the league. Like, why would it suit Man United to? Why would it suit Man United's interest for Rashford to be playing? Rashford to be playing for Tottenham. Also, I don't know. I don't know what the future holds for Rashford. I'd be really surprised if he goes to another Premier League team. I just think a lot of Premier League teams will look at him and think, is it worth the big wages? Do we want to do Man United a favour? I don't know. My guess is he would end up abroad. I'd be really surprised if I do think he'll probably end up going, but I'd be very surprised if he ended up if he ended up at Tottenham. And on Colin Muani, like, clearly a very talented player. We all saw that, particularly with his time at Nantes or at Frankfurt, and then at the World Cup in 2022. So, like, big talent and very exciting player. Maybe not quite clicked from in PSG, but that's the kind of, like, more of a sort of January type signing, like, a good established player who I think ideally could come straight into the team and he could give Spurs that kind of, that kind of alternative to Solanke, who's probably a bit more robust than Richarlison. I'd like to think he could come in and, and like hit the ground running and just give Spurs a little bit more athleticism and legs in the front line, because I think they really need that at the moment.
It'll be interesting, Jack, to see what they do, of course, in terms of that forward area, because we made that point earlier in the show that Ange has made it clear they would love to get some help for Solanke. And the fact that with Richarlison, let's be honest about it, you're just never quite sure when he is back, if he can stay fit. So it'll be intriguing to see what we can do. Jack, I do want to maybe steer us away from where we are in terms of the transfer front and just cover a couple of other questions. But I am conscious we've just hit 10 o'clock. Are you free for another 5-10 minutes, Jack? Is that okay, time-wise? Yeah. You're a star. Yeah. I want to ask you, Jack, about Heung-Min Son. Look, Spurs last week extended Sonny's contract. It was a trigger option in there. That means he will be at the club for a further season. We have heard reports that Son was hoping to negotiate a fresh, longer-term agreement, but those reports those talks reportedly never took place. I just would love to know what you've made of Sonny this season, and by the fact we haven't been able to really hit the heights of previous seasons under Sonny. And I wonder if ever you feel that's maybe an underlying issue where, again, I'm intrigued to know whether you feel that he maybe doesn't have the support to be able to feel he can reach the levels that he's reached in the previous seasons at Tottenham. What's your gauge on Sonny right now? Because he's been a fabulous player for Tottenham. Fabulous player. I know that's something that you've covered at length.
Yeah, he's been an amazing player for Tottenham. Like, brilliant player. I don't think he's playing well. I thought at the Liverpool game, I thought he was really poor, actually. I think he's lost a bit of his pace. I think that he doesn't look at his sharpest. He still works very hard, and I think he's capable of a lot of real quality in the final third. Like, his stats. If you look at his underlying stats, they're not terrible. They're better than they were the season before last. Like in 2022-23, I thought he had a difficult season. That's when he was playing with that hernia problem, obviously. His stats are not as bad now as they were then, but they're not really as good as last season. I think he's probably played maybe. This is just a theory. I think he might have played a little bit too much recently. Like, he could probably do with a bit of a break. I mean, I think maybe he could do with Like if Spurs had like better options in the front line, then maybe he could pick or choose his games a bit more, and maybe they could get a bit more out of him. Because at the moment, he's got 5 league goals so far this season after 20 games. He's not gonna. It's not been like a classic Son season, but I'm kind of hoping that they can find a way to maybe use him in such a way next season that they can get a bit more out of him. Because right now, I mean, it's clear that he's not like in his best form.
Yeah, and listen, again, I think with Sonny that we have seen periods where when he has dipped off, he has been able to come back and replicate the numbers that he's shown previously. So I guess we'll see what the future does hold for Sonny. A player that I know is very much adored to a lot of Spurs fans' hearts. I know some Spurs fans would happily let him choose himself when he feels the time is right to leave the football club. But I think it's really interesting that, again, we see that point last week, they exercised the option for a further season. I think there are some fans out there that are really upset that it hasn't gone beyond that extra year, but I guess we'll see.
It still might though. There's no. I think Spurs had to take the option because they had to just like confirm to the world that Son would be contracted for next season.
Yeah,
but they, I think that Spurs would like him to sign a new contract, like a new longer contract that goes beyond just next season. Right. That's just my impression. I don't know how likely that is, if that could get agreed, what exactly that would look like. I think from Son's point of view, I'm mad. My guess is that Son's big focus next year is going to be the 2026 World Cup, which will be his 4th and probably final World Cup as a player. So yeah, I wouldn't rule out a new contract for Son, like as in beyond the 25-26 season. I just think that there's less pressure now because he's not about to be, he's now got 18 months basically left contracted as a Spurs player. So it gives him a bit more time to start thinking about, if they can agree a final contract.
Okay. I mean, talk about players' contracts and where we're at. We know Ben Davies, Fraser Forster, Sergio Reguilon, they've entered the final 6 months of their respective contracts. I just wonder, Jack, on the basis of those 3 individuals, whether you thought it's like they may all depart in the summer. There has been rumours again that Ben Davies could be offered a new contract at the football club.
So Davies is in the same boat as Son. Like Davies is an option, and my understanding is that Spurs intend to trigger the option. So basically, at some point, I can't tell you for certain if this has happened or not, but my understanding is that at some point Spurs will formally do that, and that means that Davies will be contracted for the 25-26 season, which will be his 12th season as a Tottenham player, which is amazing. Reguilon and Forster, I don't know for certain if they have an option. I would be surprised. I would also be surprised if Spurs keep them on. Like maybe Forster might be different because I think he's such a good pro and like he's good to have around for his experience. I would be very surprised if Reguilon's still at the football club next season.
Yeah. I mean, we'd all be surprised if Reguilon was playing games, and he's playing games, given the nature of Spurs and their, escapades of what they've had with regards to injuries and absences. It's all been absolutely crazy. I'm going to fasten things up. I'm going to hand back to Shawnee here, who's going to ask you about a player that potentially may be looking to extend permanently outside the football club. Shawnee, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. Yeah, actually, I'll conflate 2 questions here into one for you, Jack, for the interest of time. Outgoings. Brian Hill, the first one on the list, looks in the zeitgeist in the news that there is interest in Girona triggering the option. But from what I've read, and I'd love it if you could shed some light, whether or not there is the truth to the idea that despite him doing really well in Girona, that Girona don't want to pay the option. They want to negotiate hard. And Daniel Levy allegedly might even be open-minded to the idea of accepting a lower outcome, a lower final figure than what the option presented. I don't know if that's a little bit atypical of Daniel Levy, but would love to get your insights on that. And it's whilst you're there, another name that has been linked a lot actually away from the club in recent years is recent months, is Richarlison. Obviously on the back of a long-term injury, just about to come back from that. Apparently he's available and fit for the North London derby, or he might be considered for the bench potentially. But there are rumours that Fluminense in Brazil have been looking around, sniffing around for them. Can you shed any light on whether he's happy at Tottenham? Obviously, from what we can gather, he's largely thinking about the Brazil squad. How can he make sure he's in the World Cup squad? for 2026. Does his future lie at Tottenham Hotspur? Do the club want him around outside of the injury return? How valuable do the club see Richarlison, the name, as part of that 25, 26-man squad going forward?
So in terms of Brian Gill, like I don't know the exact ins and outs of it, but I'm sure it will just get negotiated. You know, he's not going to play. I'd be surprised if he plays for Tottenham again. I mean, I guess I might have said that about Reguilon or Austin or Spence or Forster or any of the players who played for Tottenham recently, but I would. I'm sure that that will just get hammered out at some point. Richarlison's an interesting one, really, isn't he? Because I mean, clearly he chose to stay at Tottenham in the summer. Like, I think it would have suited Tottenham if he'd gone to Saudi Arabia. You know, if Richarlison had gone to Saudi Arabia last summer, Tottenham could have made their money back. You know, they paid Everton 50 million quid for him. He scored 12 Premier League goals in 2.5 years. So I think it would have suited Tottenham right down to the ground if he'd gone to Saudi Arabia, because they would have had money they could reinvest in other better players. But he chose to stay and fight for his place for Tottenham. I actually think he has knuckled down and worked really hard since then. It's been tough because, you know, he got the injury at the back end of last season, and this season he's had various injury problems. And then, you know, he comes back against Aston Villa, sets up the goal, does his hamstring, out for another 2 months. So it's tough. Like, I don't know. I'd be surprised if he does anything this January, just because of all the injury problems. It's like, who's going to pay the money for him? And I think I'd be surprised if Spurs let him go cheaply, just because I think they can. You think if he can get fit, he probably is quite sellable in the summer. You know, he's Brazil's number 9. Like, the guy has a market value, and that means I think it's, from Spurs' perspective, this is just me guessing a little bit, it's worth them trying to sell him for proper money, because he's really the only player they've got who they could sell for proper money, who they would be relaxed about losing. Like, so I think they've got to like try and maximize the value of
any idea where, Jack?
I mean, Saudi Arabia remains the best place to sell big name players. I can't see. I'd be shocked if anyone in Europe pays big money for him at this juncture, just because he's not done it. He's not done enough recently, I think, to warrant that. Like, clubs in Europe don't have a lot of money at the moment, and as far as they do have money, they don't really spend it on, like, you know, centre forward, like late 20s centre forwards with injury records. You know, is
there any truth to that Fluminense story? I mean, I don't know if obviously Brazil, I would imagine Brazilian football doesn't quite have the same money that most other jurisdictions do. But if Richarlison's kind of intimated that he doesn't want to go to Saudi Arabia because he thinks it might harm his World Cup chances, I don't know Brazilian football enough to know whether or not, you know, many players can make the Brazilian national team via the Brazilian Serie A. I mean, if you can shed any light there, if Fluminense have the money, is there any likelihood of that sort of deal being struck?
I mean, look, that I'm going to be honest, it's the first I've heard of it, that particular rumor. That's not to say that it's not true. I would be surprised if they could agree anything as a permanent deal with Tottenham, just because, you know, 6 months or less than 6 months ago, Tottenham were looking at possibly getting 50 million from the Saudi Pro League for Richarlison. I doubt they get that much from Fluminense. That said, I believe in the Club World Cup, so it might be that and again, this is just hypothetical for me, but I'm speculating a bit. But if they could loan him there, then he has a good Club World Cup. He's kind of in the shop window. Maybe teams would be more willing to buy him. So I can kind of see Spurs, in theory, maybe countenancing a loan if that would improve his value. That all said, Spurs need bodies. Like, what do Spurs need right now is they need fit, available footballers. And Richarlison, if Richarlison's close to getting fit, I actually think they need him. I think they need him now more than they might have done like a few months ago. Particularly given that, you know, Son's struggling, Werner's struggling, Moore's been in and out of the team, Odebear's not played in months. Like, if Richarlison can get fit, I can actually see him having like a bit of a role in the second half of the season. So maybe if instead of loaning him out to increase his fitness and confidence and his market value, maybe it makes sense to keep him for the second half of the season and let him kind of do his thing back for Tottenham again. I don't know. This is pure speculation on my part. It's just how I say it.
Yeah, Jack, we appreciate it. Look, we know we're pushed for time, and the interrogation, I promise you, is nearly over, I assure you. We've got a couple of questions to close it on finally. And can I just say, look, we are acutely aware, because I'm seeing a lot of comments coming through to us, that there are reports from Damasio that Napoli have held exploratory talks over a deal to sign Timo Werner on loan, and that deal would reportedly happen after the Arsenal versus Tottenham game. That's coming in from Damasio at the moment, just to acknowledge the fact that we are seeing a lot of the comments coming through. We acknowledge you on that for sure. So, like I said, to be very, very clear. Jack, I feel like I know the answer, and I'm going to say to you what would constitute a successful season under Ange Postecoglou. So I'm going to flip away from that question for a second. Look, I have to say that probably during the whole time that I've ever done Last One on Spurs over the last 7-8 years, and certainly from your time covering Tottenham as a credible journalist and reporter that you are, and many that love your views and takes on the view from the lane, this is probably the most unpopular that I've ever seen ENIC and Daniel Levy's tenureship at the football club. I just would love to know, just I'll say very quickly on this. This could really overspill. And of course, we've both got kids, so it could all kick off in both our households here. How do you see this situation playing out with regards to ENIC and Levy, maybe in the short term or the long term? Do you see there being a possible sale down the line? I mean, because it just feels like this relationship right now, it's become a little bit untenable, really. You know, Daniel's name is being chanted inside the stadium, outside the stadium with that new Kulusevski song that has really taken on a new lease of life. What do you make of the ownership, Jack? I have to ask you that as we look to close this show.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think that there is a degree of like fan discontent with ENIC right now, which is probably stronger than I can remember it being in recent years. Like I know, every now and then there's a kind of upsurge in fan discontent. You know, it happened in 2021 around the time of the Super League. It happened in 2023 when Conte was sacked, and I think right now it's pretty bad. That said, it usually does go away. Like it usually does fade away a bit, usually because of results on the pitch. And you know, this could be a very good calendar year for Tottenham. Like they could win a trophy, and if they do win a trophy, I do think a lot of that discontent will fade away. But a lot it does depend on how they do. Like equally, it's kind of foreseeable, let's say, that things could get pretty ugly. Like if let's say they go out the cups, very plausible, and the season just finishes with Spurs 12th in the league. I think it'll get pretty toxic. I think if that scenario happens, it's going to get really toxic. Like those last few league games would not be fun if Spurs are just drifting in the Prem and they're not in any of the cup competitions. So it could be really, really, really negative. And then of course there'd be a whole decision about Ange's future. And to be honest, I think, you know, if they sacked him hypothetically, I think a lot of the narrative would actually be about, you know, it wouldn't be, was Ange good enough? Did he have the right ideas? It would be, did Daniel Levy give him the tools to do the job? So I think that at the moment, like Levy and Postecoglou's futures are kind of entwined, aren't they? Like Levy can't really, Levy's kind of wrapped up in the success of the Postecoglou appointment, I think. So he needs it to work. Like he really, really needs this one to work. So it's difficult. It's like it feels kind of on knife edge at the moment. I think it will do for the rest of this season. And it's difficult. You know, you can't really tell like how it's going to turn out. But I can envisage both like a very positive and a pretty negative scenario, depending on how they do over the last few weeks of the season.
I promise you, Jack, this is my final question before I hand over to Sean to close us. Will Ange Postecoglou, Jack, be the Spurs manager at the start of next season?
50-50, can't call it. Impossible to call. I would love it if he is, because if he is, it means that he's had success this season. Yeah. And I would love to see. You know, I'm sure your fans would love it even more than me. But I would love to see Postecoglou win a trophy. And I'm sure if he did win a trophy, he'd be like, you know, he'd be an immortal figure at Tottenham. You know, I imagine that if he did, he would get to do next season, which would be the third year of his contract. But I think that, you know, he's not gonna at the moment. I don't think the league form alone is gonna get him there. That's just my opinion looking at the league table. Yeah. But yeah, I would love it if he's a success at Spurs. I've always said that.
Jack, you're a superstar. Let me hand back to Sean to close this show. Sean, over to you.
It's the only question that we always finish with here on Last Word on Spurs, Jack. And it has to be, my man. Thank you so much. It's been great to meet you, by the way.
Superb.
How many transfers do you see Tottenham outside of Antony Kinsky? How many more transfers can you see Tottenham Hotspur bringing in before the 31st of January?
I'm going to guess. One in just sounds really depressing, so I'm gonna live a little and say two.
Come on, Jack, please,
a
please, mate.
defender and an attacking player. But it just depends. Like it will completely depend on what's on the market. Like I don't think they'll do it whatever. I think they'll only do it if they think if they can find player deals that I think really make sense for them.
Jack, you've been a superstar. You've not ducked any question. We've kept you longer than what we should have done. I'm so sorry, Jack. Look, there's been nearly 6 hours of you that are watching the show live. Thanks so much for all the support. Jack, of course, go and check him out. View from the Lane, and one of the great Spurs podcasts out there. Jack, I think you are, for many out there, a sign of where they go for therapy, where they do need that to keep people going, that things are going to be okay. I know we lost Charlie last summer. We've got Jay in there now that is trying to pick that up and keep us going. Jack, where can we find a View from the Lane? And more importantly, where can they find you for the work you do in the Spurs world? That I've got to say, been one of the consistent voices and narrators that we need out there for the last 7-8 years. And bless you, I don't know how you've done it so long. Given that you are neutral, must I just say, and not a Tottenham fan, but I know you must feel like a Tottenham fan now, given how many years.
A bit. Thanks, mate. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all your kind words. That really means a lot. So, if anyone's listening, they can find me either at Jack Pitt-Brooke, which is written on my screen. You can find me on The Athletic, where I write all my stuff, or you can listen to the Spurs podcast that I do with a few other colleagues of mine, View from the Lane, which you can find at all normal podcast listening places.
Jack, you are a superstar. And this is the very last question. Prediction for Arsenal, Jack. Be careful what you say here.
Well, normally I make predictions and they go wrong. But you know what? I've changed my mind. I think Tottenham are going to win. You know why? Because Tottenham only beat good teams. Who are the last 6 teams? Who are the last 6 games that Tottenham won?
You said this.
Man City, Aston Villa, Southampton. Okay, fair play. Liverpool and Man United. Right, Tottenham only beat good teams. Like they're really bad at winning the games they should win, but they're actually quite good at winning these big games. Also, have you seen Arsenal play recently? They're rubbish.
Jack, I think I want to keep you for longer now, but I can't because you're.
No, I think I just kind of I just think I always my predictions are terrible. If you you wouldn't get very far if you kind of tried betting on my predictions. But in this particular instance, I've just got a feeling that Tottenham might be able to go and nick it because they're so up and down. This Tottenham team, I've never seen a team where like there's a bigger gap between them on a good day and them on a bad day. Like if you look at the table, you think they're pretty average.
Yeah,
and they kind of are average in like the literal sense of the word, but that average is not like they're hitting a sort of 5 out of 10 performance every week. No. It's genuinely the average between a handful of 10 out of 10 performances and then some of the worst performances I've ever seen from a Spurs team. You know what I mean? like we can all think of I can think of, I'm sure you could as well, like 5 or 6 times this season where Spurs have been unbelievably good. Oh. And then 5 or 6 times a season where they have been like a shockingly awful, like a depressingly bad. Like there's so much variance. And that's not good or healthy or like what a good team does, because a good team should be, hitting that consistent level every single week. But because there's that variance and because it feels like Tottenham are basically on a roller coaster all the time, there's a 50% chance. I think there's a 50% chance we'll go to Arsenal on Wednesday night and lose 5-0. I would be not surprised. I would not be surprised about that at all. There's also a 50% chance they'll go then wipe the floor with them because Tottenham on their day are really good. So it's just pure pure roulette. Like nobody knows what it's going to be, but it's either going to be extremely good or extremely bad.
I totally agree, Jack. All I would say is don't quit on us. Don't give up on us. We've had you for 7-8 years. Keep riding the Spurs beat. We need your voice in our community. Keep us going and keep us saying you've been a star. The wonderful Jack Pitt-Brooke, like I say, football reporter, journalist, Athletic. Make sure you check him out across everything. Shawnee, thank you so much. There you go. We have been the last word on Spurs from Shawnee, from Jack and myself. Please keep safe, keep well, and as always, come on, you Spurs.